Hi everyone, welcome to your lecture on cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the biochemical process that makes ATP, which is again the cell's energy currency, from glucose. So basically you're making energy out of sugar. And it occurs in both autotrophs and heterotrophs, meaning both in plants and organisms that also do photosynthesis, and it occurs in animals such as you and I. There are two main types of respiration, and they are aerobic and anaerobic. Aerobic respiration requires the use of oxygen in order to release the energy. The chemical equation for aerobic respiration is basically the opposite of photosynthesis. So the reactants this time are going to be glucose and oxygen molecules, and they're going to be broken down into the products of water, carbon dioxide, and energy. Okay, if you put the arrow going in the other direction and changed out energy with sunlight, then you would have photosynthesis. That's anaerobic respiration, does not require oxygen, and it is also known as fermentation. But both aerobic and anaerobic respiration start with the same process, and that is glycolysis. Glycolysis is glyco meaning sweet and lysis meaning to break apart. So it literally means to split the sugar. And it occurs in the cytoplasm of all cells, so outside of the mitochondria. It's just in that fluid within your cells that holds all of the organelles in there. And the chemical equation for glycolysis is that you start with one molecule of glucose and add in 2 molecules of ATP. You need a little bit of energy to get this reaction started. And basically, through the process of glycolysis, we take that glucose, which is a 6-carbon molecule, and break it into 2 pyruvic acids, which are both 3-carbon molecules. So you break it in half into 2 pyruvic acids, and in the process, you make 4 units of ATP. So when you put 2 in and you get 4 out, your net gain of ATP is 2. So glucose molecules are broken down into 2 pyruvic acid, also known as pyruvate molecules. Again, the glucose molecules are 6-carbon molecules. We had to build those in our biochemistry unit. And so you should remember how the carbons make the ring. And then the 2 pyruvic acid or pyruvate molecules are both 3-carbon molecules. So you've got all the same ingredients there. You just kind of break it in half. And 2 ATP molecules are used, and 4 are created, resulting in a net gain of 2. If you put in 2 and you get 4 out, then you've only really gained 2 ATP out of the process of glycolysis. And then following glycolysis, the pyruvic acid can follow one of 2 paths. If oxygen is present, it'll go into aerobic respiration, which it will go inside the mitochondria and go into the Krebs cycle, which is part 2, and the electron transport chain, which is part 3. Or it'll follow anaerobic respiration, also known as fermentation. Although glycolysis only results in the production of 2 molecules of ATP, so the amount of energy produced is very little, it happens extremely, extremely quickly. So because it is so fast, your body can produce quite a bit of energy without the presence of oxygen, because glycolysis happens with no oxygen needed. So here's kind of a picture of glycolysis. Again, you start with glucose, which is that 6-carbon molecule. And the first thing we do is glycolysis, which produces a net gain of 2 ATP molecules. And then if you follow the arrow down, that would be going into anaerobic or fermentation. And if you follow the arrow straight across, then inside the mitochondria, that would be going towards the aerobic respiration. And we'll go into that next. So aerobic respiration occurs inside the mitochondria. And it takes those two pyruvic acid molecules and they're converted into acetyl-CoA. And then that is broken down further into hydrogen ions, carbon dioxide, and ATP in the Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle is named just like the Calvin cycle was named after the scientists that discovered it. The hydrogen ions in it bond to carrier molecules called NAD and FAD to make NADH and FADH2. I'm just going to refer to them as NAD and FAD, and they carry those hydrogens. So NAD and FAD go through a series of step reactions in the electron transport chain in order to produce a whole bunch of ATP. So here in this picture, you're going to see the NAD and FAD both being input. This is the membrane, the inner membrane of the mitochondria. The matrix is the fluid that is inside of that inner membrane, and then the inner membrane space is the space between the inside folds and the outer membrane. Mitochondria have two membranes, and I'll show you that when we get to a picture of the mitochondria. So you put those NAD and FAD in there, and they are carrying those hydrogen ions. So that's kind of released through this electron transport chain, very similar to what we saw go on in photosynthesis. So you can see those hydrogen ions being released, and then you end up getting just the NADH and the NAD and the FAD alone without the hydrogens on there. So again, this inner membrane space becomes positively charged with all of these hydrogen ions accumulating in there, and the electrons that were released from that get carried through all these protein channels and end up creating water as a byproduct. In aerobic respiration, it is called aerobic respiration because it requires the use of oxygen. The oxygen is being input right here, and that's what's helping to bond to those hydrogen ion molecules and make water as the byproduct. So you breathe in oxygen, and then that oxygen is used to produce water as a byproduct. And then these hydrogen ions in the inner membrane space are going to go through the ATP synthase channel and create molecules of ATP as a byproduct. So the things that you have to put in aerobic respiration are NAD and FAD and oxygen, and you produce water and energy, ATP. Each cycle of the Krebs cycle produces 10 NAD molecules, 2 FAD molecules, and 2 ATP. And so if you total all of it up, your end product of aerobic respiration is 36 ATP molecules. If you add that to the 2 produced in glycolysis, you get a total production of 38 ATP molecules every time you go through aerobic respiration, starting with glycolysis and ending with the electron transport chain. So if you follow it along, we just went through glycolysis over here where you took the glucose, broke it into 2 pyruvic acid molecules and created 2 ATP. And then we went to the Krebs cycle. Carbon dioxide is released as a byproduct of that in the presence of oxygen. And through the electron transport chain, we end up making 36 more ATP molecules and releasing water. In anaerobic respiration, anaerobic means that you do not have any oxygen available, and this still occurs in the cytoplasm where glycolysis occurred. There are 2 different kinds of anaerobic respiration. They are lactic acid fermentation, which is going to occur like in your muscles and would make you sore. If you're working out really hard and you get a lot of buildup of lactic acid in your muscles, it's going to make you very, very sore. It means your muscles ran out of oxygen. and started using anaerobic respiration to give you the energy that you need. And that's going to cause a lot of muscle soreness while you work that out. Alcoholic fermentation is going to be used in the beer, wine, cheese, bread making industry because it makes ethanol and carbon dioxide. But both of processes result in the production of only 2 ATP molecules. ATP concentration, the more ATP molecules that are available, the slower the rate of reaction. That is the factor affecting cellular respiration. So if you go down here, if there's no oxygen, then you either have alcoholic or lactic acid fermentation. Again, alcoholic fermentation is going to take those pyruvic acid molecules, which are 3 carbon molecules, and transfer them to ethyl alcohol, which are 2 carbon molecules, and carbon dioxide, which is that bubbly gas. So that's why when you make bread and it runs out of oxygen, that's why the bread will rise. The yeast will cause the bread to rise because it's going through alcoholic fermentation. The holes in the bread, the air pockets in the bread, are caused by the production of carbon dioxide gas. And any alcohol produced in the process is cooked off when you bake the bread. It's also used for beer and wine. So when they go through that alcoholic fermentation without the process of, with the absence of oxygen, if the carbon dioxide is released, then you won't have anything that's fizzy or bubbly. So more like wine. But if you keep that carbon dioxide like they do with beer, then it's going to be carbonated or bubbly. And then the lactic acid is taking those pyruvic acid molecules and converting them into molecules of lactic acid. And that is going to happen in your muscles if you run out of oxygen when you're exercising and go into anaerobic respiration, and that is going to cause a lot of muscle soreness. But it does give you, especially for sprinters and stuff like that, gives you that extra burst of energy because it can happen very, very fast.